Right, let's get to this now. The recent events, the thuggish behavior of that mob in Senekal at the court there has brought the police's crowd management policies into sharp focus. An amendment to the SAPS Act is making its way through the system. It prohibits the use of rifles to control crowds. But independent researcher David Bruce says this will not help. He also says it will do nothing to stop police brutality. He joins me now for a conversation about the use of force by police officers. David Bruce, I don't know how closely you were following the events in Senegal before we get into, the heart of our discussion around the whole issue of the amendments that are being proposed. I want to ask you, the SAPS has been giving an explanation. Many people have been asking, under normal circumstances in a service delivery protest, when the crowd turns violent, you see rubber bullets fired, stun grenades fired, and you'll be given numbers of people who are arrested instantly. So let me update you in case you've not been tracking it. The explanation from the SAPS is that in Senegal, many of those people who took part in that riot were actually armed with firearms. And they're saying many of these firearms, in fact, those firearms were legal and licensed firearms. And the explanation is that they took an approach that said, if we engage in any act to sort of disarm and sort of quell this violence in a violent manner, there'll be a shootout and people could die, and there would be innocent bystanders who also end up getting hit in the crossfire. What do you think? What's your sense? It seems to me they're saying it was a tactical decision, that they decided not to use force. Does this talk to the issues that you are raising concern about?
Okay, well, I mean, it talks to certain current issues in South Africa, which were highlighted partly by the events at Marikana, which is about police responses to armed crowds. And in fact, one of the salient points here is that it highlights the need for the release of the report of the panel of experts that was completed 2 years ago. So, following the events at Marikana, there was a commission of inquiry, and one of the issues that it specifically highlighted was this question about police responses to crowds that are armed. And so it was one of the issues on the agenda of the panel. And the panel does, the panel's report does address this issue. It also has a secondary report on training, which also addresses this issue. So, one of the kind of issues that I would suggest that this really does highlight is the importance of releasing the panel's report.
In fairness to you, David, I had not prepped you beforehand to tell you that I would be posing this question to you. So thank you for engaging in it, particularly from your understanding of the issues at play. Let's get to the reason why you and I are talking. There's an amendment that is being proposed by the Civilian Secretariat for Police Services that has to do with amending aspects of the South African Police Services Act and to deal specifically with issues of the use of force by police officers. You are saying this amendment won't solve the problems. Why?
Okay, well, let me perhaps clarify. There's an amendment which it's a draft bill, so it's a preliminary stage to the parliamentary process. It's a very intricate and complicated bill, dealing with a very wide range of issues. And so my overall response to the bill is that there's a lot to be looked at and understood there. And again, I would just reiterate the point that one thing that needs to be brought into the conversation, members of the public and, for instance, members of parliament need to have access to that report of the panel of experts in order to be able to fully consider this draft amendment. But nevertheless, one of the issues that is worthy of consideration is just that the questions to do with the use of force by police have been emerged once again as a burning issue in South Africa in recent months. And so, the one question then is just to what degree this bill provides an answer to the challenges that we are currently facing in terms of the use of force by police.
Yeah, in fact, let me ask you about what you're calling for that has to do with a use of force policy, and you raise a number of issues that you believe should form core of that policy, the whole issue around protecting life versus protecting property, but also importantly, the issue of de-escalation versus escalation. And before I pose that question to you, I want to bring this up, because it brought back those memories of what happened in Marikana, as you point out. A few days before the actual massacre on the Kopi there was a march by these workers coming back from Karia mine. And it seemed to me that initially the approach was that one that you allude to, of de-escalation. And of course, it then took a very horrible turn a bit later on. But let's just point out what we are talking about when we talk about a policy of de-escalation. Let's have a look at this clip.
Asizanga sithi sizolibamba kodwa sinenkinga inkinga yethu yilezi zinto eniziphethe azikho emthethweni into lothina lapha kanina thina lokuhamba lapho ndalo thinahlala ngafuna thelo ndlela thinawo ngena nto thina thayilwile Yes. Ngiyacela tata. Njengoba besivumelane ukuthi sicela ukuya lenani siyabelana. Zinto sicela ukuthi ningazithisi sinike manje sihambeni. Uma ngabe lithethe ngothatha lesi zonke. Siyacela. Nihambe nathi mina ngoba thina asinawula baba. Asilwi.
So what that situation is that we were playing just now, David, is basically a negotiation that had taken place between the commander of the police on the ground and the protesters, and basically accommodation to say, we understand you want to take the weapons from us, but escort us to a point where we feel safe enough, and then we will surrender the weapons. And he initially appeared to be open to that. De-escalation, is that something that exists in the vocabulary of the ordinary South African police officer patrolling the streets of El Dorado Park?
Well, no, I would say, you see, I mean, it is something that to some degree is much more part of the repertoire of public order policing. It's not really something that has been brought into what one could say kind of call day-to-day policing in a meaningful way.
And you also bring in the issue of use of force to protect lives and life versus use of force to protect property. Talk to me about that. How important is that to be part of a use of force policy that you are calling for?
Well, I think there's two issues here. The one thing is just that, I mean, it's an already essentially an established feature of South African law, that if one's talking specifically about the use of lethal force, which is, or at least potentially lethal force, the use of firearms, then the use of lethal force is basically not permitted to protect property. It's only permitted to protect life. But the broader point that in respect of protection of life and the use of force policy is that is the idea that the police should, as a kind of high level aspiration and goal, be invested in the protection of life and see that as being the kind of foremost purpose of the use of lethal force.
And then lastly, David, there's this a case that you allude to, the case of Tshepiso Aduns, and basically you're talking about the example of the accountability measures, because a lot of the times when there's an incident, such as the incident around Nathaniel Julius and his death in El Dorado Park, many people call for accountability and for people to be held responsible. And then you point out there other weaknesses in that system, particularly that have to do with a failure to embed a commitment to protecting life and to de-escalation in the approach to use of force. How does this case that you allude to highlight and foreground these issues that you talk about?
Okay, well, the case you're talking about is a case where the police, I mean, it's been a subject of one or two press reports, and from what we know, according to those reports, a mother was experiencing difficulties with her son in terms of the terminology that she used. He suffered from some kind of mental instability and had been behaving aggressively. So she hoped that the police would help her to manage the situation. And the end result of it was that the police killed her son. They said that he'd been charging at them with a knife. So, but the broader point is that the kind of international experience is that in order for police to exercise effective control over how their members use force, they need to have what could be called effective internal administrative systems for managing the use of force. Those include the use of force policy, but also systems for ensuring that there is compliance with those kinds of policies. And so in South Africa, the focus has very much been on these type of external mechanisms, such as IPID, and the role of the criminal justice system in holding police officers responsible for these kind of incidents, such as the killing of Nathaniel Julies. But basically, the kind of lesson from international experience is that in the absence of these type of internal administrative systems, you cannot really have effective control of the use of force.
So practically, you're talking about, I'm thinking in my head, I've always had the sense that, you know, every use of a service pistol should be recorded, and basically there should, you know, once that service pistol has been used, basically it should be put away for a full report of the circumstances under which it was used. I've been thinking about things such as body cams and dash cams. In fact, in my sense, David, as a last question to you, is that nothing should happen that is legal and lawful by a police officer that is not recorded on some kind of camera, so that there's a record. Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about internal mechanisms?
Well, you know, the issue of body cameras is a subject in itself, because there's often a difficulty in these kind of technological fixes to these type of problems. The one thing is just that there's a whole type of administrative and technological backup that also needs to be put in place. So, for instance, you know, in the one little study that I was involved in to do with body cameras, or these were vehicle-mounted cameras. You know, the cameras were installed, but the end result of it was that hardly any use was actually made of the kind of video material that was being recorded by these cameras. So, you know, you know, while the idea of body cameras does sound appealing, it isn't necessarily a straightforward matter to kind of implement those kind of technological fixes to these problems. But the basic point is that one needs to have within police organizations themselves, one needs to have an investment in improving standards around how force is used, and there's various options that for kind of applying or implementing that commitment. The one would be implementation of a use of force policy. There's systems of use of force monitoring, but you know, body cameras and so on would be another possibility.
All right, thank you for that. That is David Bruce. He is an independent researcher weighing in on what has been proposed as an amendment to the South African Police Service Act.